Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Seek and Play podcast. I'm Dr. Jane Heston.
My name is Ronan Healy.
And just a reminder for our listeners at home that our interviews are available to watch on YouTube and Spotify, as some of our guests throughout the season built out some of their answers using Lego. In today's episode, we were joined by the fantastic Savannah Vize. Savannah is a Helsinki-based regenerative designer, researcher with a background in graphic design and place-based community engagement. Savannah also has a master's degree in creative sustainability. She uses collaborative and visual approaches to explore and communicate complex topics in accessible and digestible ways. Touching on artistic, academic, and activist modes, her work centers on the importance of playfulness, joy, and emotionally supportive creative practice in our engagement with eco-social sustainability. Having looked back and rewatched Savannah's interview, we identified a number of quotes that we really enjoyed that we would like to share with our listeners today. The playbook comes from a place of my own eco-anxiety. I hope it provides a glimpse of hopefulness and playfulness in an otherwise distressing space. Play embeds hopefulness and joy, which is really important when working towards a more socially and ecologically just future. Play is about finding opportunities to be curious, which can exist in work, leisure, and how we navigate the world.
So in season 2, we were asked by one of our guests who stood out from season 1. And we didn't answer at the same time. We counted to 3 and then said the person's name out loud. And it was Savannah. Mm-hmm. And we put a Jester's hat for anyone who's watching this. We were thinking about, do we put a king or queen's hat on Savannah? But we thought, in the nature and spirit of the podcast, we put a Jester's hat. And that is in no way disrespectful to Savannah. It is the utmost respect you can get at Seeking Play to get the Jester's hat on. And it really was, when we finished talking with Savannah, we were left with a sense of hope for the youth and for the future of the ecology of this planet. Savannah, in a way, became an archetype or a persona of the type of playful, creative, articulate change maker that we would like to see in the world. So yeah, Savannah Vize, take a bow, because you definitely impressed us, and we're hoping, and we know the listeners will be equally as impressed. So for now, we hope you enjoy this episode.
Enjoy. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
I dropped something.
Savannah Vize, you are very welcome. Thank you for joining us today on the Seeking Play podcast. Myself and Ronan are very excited to have a great conversation with you today about your career, and I'm sure listeners will be very excited to hear all about your current work and your research. So I am going to kick off first, and I am going to take you right back, Savannah. I am going to ask you to share with our listeners, what were you like as a kid?
Yeah, I mean, thanks for having me, first of all. But yeah, as a kid, I find it funny in the context of play, I was quite a quiet kid, really, very kind of studious and a little bit reserved, always very creative and curious. So I think that's probably where my interest in play comes from. I was never really one for PE or sports play, but I preferred kind of just like imaginative play, just things that are hands-on, creative, a bit experimental. I had 2 siblings as well, so there was a lot of play and experiment there. We used to make a lot of stuff together, and I think, yeah, that's probably where my love of play stems from. I also grew up in a very rural space, so access to nature and, yeah, the environment just being around me as well, that was also a big part of my childhood. And yeah, a big space for play as well there, I think.
So Savannah, like, that painted a lovely picture of you and your siblings out there, running riot out in nature. And like in the act of play with your siblings and friends, is there any bumps, bruises, breaks, scars, or just dangerous adventures that you think has contributed, even in a little way, to your identity as an adult?
It's tricky. I'm not sure. I had a very kind of sheltered childhood, so maybe not so many bumps and breaks, and because I was quite a careful child, and maybe that also kept me away from that. But I think more just in general, being exposed to a lot of creativity around my family and kind of extended family, and through travel and holidays and playing with my siblings. I think that's probably where it led to. But yeah, no kind of serious bumps or breaks. I don't know if I've ever broken a bone actually, so not much interesting there.
Yeah, good child, good kid.
Exactly.
So with regard, when we're looking at playfulness now as an adult, what would adult playfulness mean to you, Savannah?
So I think there's a lot of stigma around being playful as an adult, and I think often in the space of play research, it so frequently gets drawn back to being a kid and being a child, and that childhood sense of playfulness as if it only exists within that space. And so for me, I think it's expanding that definition of play to be just more about joyfulness and things that are fun and bring us joy. In my visual design work, I think there's a very clear space to be playful. It's with color and illustration, and that's very easy and tangible. It can be quite kind of whimsical in that space, but otherwise in day-to-day life, I think it's more about kind of finding opportunities to be curious and experimental. I think that is play for me as an adult, and that can exist in work, but also in leisure and just about how we kind of navigate the world.
I love the fact you just called out that it is a stigma. And part of our raison d'etre, our reason to set this podcast up, is just to, if you say it enough times, you can be a playful adult. It kind of, pushes that little stigma aside. So you chose two quotes. We kind of offer our people we interview 2 quotes. I'm going to read them out. These are playful quotes, and there's probably around 10, 15 of them, and you chose Alan Watts as number 1. I'm going to ask the question, why did it mean something to you? So Alan Watts, this is the secret of life, to be completely engaged in what you are doing in the here and now. And instead of calling it work, realize it is play. So why did that one resonate with you?
I think because I've chosen to go down a career path that is very creative and playful, and what drew me to that is because it just means that I get to have fun when I'm working. And I think everything is just a bit easier when it's play. It is no longer work, but it's exciting and stimulating, and it just makes everything that much more richer. Yeah, and kind of drawing that distinction away from work, and that play can be everywhere and everything is really important.
I like that. Play can be everywhere and everything. Great. We're going to put you down as a quote. You're next. So Albert Einstein, Albert always gets in there.
Yeah.
He said quite a few good things, as did Alan, in fairness. Play is the highest form of research.
Yeah, I think this just kind of reached out to me because I have been exploring play within the research space. And I think as a designer as well, design is so often about research, and play is an opportunity to be curious and experiment. And it takes our imagination, and that in turn kind of takes us to all sorts of different places that maybe rational thinking, structured thinking, being incredibly strategic and following set processes can't. So I think, play opens up these spaces that other ways of inquiry maybe don't.
And that's a nice segue into my next question, in that, like, how do you balance taking your work seriously whilst also taking it not too seriously?
This is definitely a hard one, and something I think I probably don't always do particularly well. But I think because a lot of my interests in my work focuses on this space of eco-social sustainability, these are really kind of important and serious topics, and play therefore acts as the tool to try and balance that seriousness with something which is a bit more joyful and kind of enables me to work with those topics long term. And I think play also, it kind of allows these opportunities to find variety and have conversations, and by harnessing those small opportunities for playfulness wherever you can, it it allows you to deal with serious subjects in a way that isn't too kind of overwhelming and overbearing.
Yeah, great.
Okay, fantastic. I would like to ask you about when you were starting off at the start of your career. So when you look back at the very beginning of your career, what advice would you give to your younger self, either about being more serious or more playful in the way that you thought, or in the way you interacted with others?
So I think a lot of it again goes back to what we were talking about play being the stigma, and the idea that once you kind of get through childhood, play is no longer something that can exist in these different aspects of your life. So I think realizing, first of all, that play is a valid way of working, not because it's such an integral part of being creative, but it also just opens up so many different avenues of exploration and interaction, and that in itself is important. And then maybe from my more recent explorations of play, I think it's really important to understand that play is different for every person. So your version of play might be somebody else's complete worst nightmare. And that's really, in terms of collaborative design and participatory design approaches, I think that's really important to understand that we have these different ways of being playful and having fun. And to make sure to balance that and not just assume everybody's is the same.
And Savannah, we're going to touch on your playbook later, but we're interested as well as what are you currently doing and how did you get into that field of research and work?
Yeah, so I'm currently in a kind of transitional space. I graduated from my master's degree back in December, and now I'm exploring where I can use both design research approaches and design practice alongside research in eco-social sustainability and kind of combine those areas. And I think my interest in those two areas started to come together back in my bachelor's degree, where I was already very engaged in the climate crisis, but I wanted to understand what the role of more kind of creative practice can play in addressing that. And I saw traditional design, as I'd experienced it up until that point, as a lot about storytelling and how we kind of create narratives, whether that's through, service design approaches or through much more traditional formats like illustration. And so I was interested in how the climate crisis was therefore kind of communicated through media and news and fiction, and the fact that that's a very engaging and immersive way of kind of exploring those complex topics. And I think that opened up doors to understanding what playfulness could be within those storytelling spaces.
Very good. So how would you say that your career has evolved then over time, Savannah?
In my bachelor's, I had that big focus on the climate crisis and, yeah, as I said, kind of storytelling and narratives and immersive design in that space. And as I moved from that, I worked for a few years in a community engagement studio in London. So I was working with communities on place-based participatory design projects, understanding how local people could have influence and impact in their area and, actively contribute to positive change. And for me, this kind of connected the dots between social and environmental sustainability and made me realize the importance of intersectionality in these spaces, and how we can't just address social or ecological issues separately, but they need to be done in conjunction in a very kind of systemic way. And through this job, I also saw a different application of play as I'd maybe understood it beforehand. And it was a key element of engagement and how we worked with people in these communities. It, helped with facilitation, but it also helped with building relationships, whether through visual design, but also in how we were designing workshops and conversations and making sure that processes were as truly participatory and collaborative as possible. And I think that demonstrated for me how play can be used as a tool for good design in lots of different ways, rather than just this kind of initial storytelling narrative element that I'd become interested in.
Great.
That's really interesting.
And I've done our demographic analysis, and apparently 5-year-olds are the largest cohort to listen to this podcast. This is all lies. This is all playful nonsense. Can you explain your current job, to a 5-year-old? What would you say to them?
Yeah, well, I have trouble explaining my job to adults as well. So
I think we all do. I think everyone does.
Yeah, even to myself, I'm not really sure. So I've said that I work with people, I work with other people where we use art, play, and being curious to find ways to look after nature and to look after each other so that the world is the best that it can be in the future.
Perfect. I like it. I might use that for our 6-year-old.
Or my parents who always ask.
Parents is a good one. Yeah, that's always a tricky explanation.
Do
Yeah.
do you play with Lego? What do you do?
Even this morning, we finished a workshop on Friday, and we created a little slideshow for them, and about 2 minutes. And we like to bring our 2-year-old not so involved in what we're doing. But this morning over breakfast, we said, "Oh, honey, here's a little video. It's 2 minutes." 15 seconds in, she was like, "Oh, okay, that's fine. I'm done." Like there's adults immersed in systems thinking and highly creative environment, quite unique with our background. 10, 15 seconds.
Yeah, that's the limit.
Yeah, that's something Lego-ish. That's what you do. That's fine. The 5-year-olds and 6-year-olds don't really care.
Yeah.
So I think we've obviously touched on it earlier on with regard to your Eco Playbook. So we're going to really delve into trying to understand more about your Eco Playbook. So my first question would be, obviously for your master's thesis, you did produce the Environmental Citizens Playbook, a co-design inquiry into the playful potential of environmental action. So my question would be, Savannah, were you always interested in environmental action and play before starting your master's program, or was this something that emerged throughout your studies? And it's a double-barreled question. And the second part would be, what did you enjoy most about researching and creating this playbook?
So again, as maybe we've already touched on a little bit, I've had a long-term engagement with the climate crisis specifically. I was very lucky enough to travel a lot as a kid, and I think that built a really strong connection to the environment and looking after nature around us and the different more than humans that we share this world with. And that definitely led into the topics I explored in my bachelor's, and then through that obviously started working in community engagement in London. And I think and then through that community engagement role, I realized that I would like to apply a lot of this thinking and understanding of participatory approaches, climate and environment, and more systemic understandings of sustainability in a creative way. And that's what led me to my master's degree. And I think a lot of my master's degree is in creative sustainability. So a lot of the topics that we were covering in different courses were very intense and overwhelming, often kind of depressing and debilitating at times. And that for me stirred up a lot of eco-anxiety, which I think I'd struggled with anyway, but this really kind of centered that in what I was spending most of my time looking at. And so the thesis opportunity for me was a chance to maybe try and rebalance that experience a little bit and understand how we can engage with these topics in ways which are more kind of okay for our well-being, not beneficial for our well-being. I don't think it can be, but would find kind of roots to engaging with these topics in a way that wasn't completely distressing and overwhelming. It definitely came from a place to balance my eco-anxiety and then also find a way to explore the role of play for eco-social change more broadly. And I think to the second part of your question, I think that's probably what I enjoyed the most, is that it did give me this really clear space to be a bit more playful and joyful in talking about these really serious topics, whereas otherwise a lot of the stuff that I was doing was just kind of focused on the serious side of it. And so it gave more of a kind of space for escape whilst still exploring the topics in a very detailed and thorough way.
And when we read it together, it is a very impressive thesis.
Thank
I hope
you.
scored highly, whoever the corrector of that is. Very playful, very visual. We loved every element of it. So that's what we thought, we got to get Savannah on the podcast. And an important thing that you put in as part of your thesis is the distinction between play and playfulness. Mm-hmm. We think that's a very important distinction, but can you explain the difference, or your view of the difference between the two?
Yeah, so it's a big part of some of the background research that I did around the thesis, and there's a lot of definitions throughout the history of play research which tries to distinguish between these spaces of playfulness, play, and then also games as a kind of third subsection of that. And I think games, for example, is maybe what a lot of people think of when we think of play, but they often stick to these very kind of rule-bound, unstructured ways of being playful. So they have these kind of boundaries within which you can't necessarily step out of, and often is using kind of playful elements, but towards a specific goal or type of interaction. And play, on the other hand, doesn't need to fit into those rules. It can be much more kind of free and open and uncontrolled, but you might still categorize play itself as an activity. So, you are playing, you're engaging within the activity of play. So then playfulness, to me, and again, there are multiple definitions of this, so this is just kind of where I've settled, but playfulness to me is kind of a further step removed from that. So it finds play in lots of different levels and activities and behaviors and actions, and it doesn't need to exist within that dedicated play space. So I think Sicart says in his book Play Matters, he describes playfulness as the attitude rather than the activity itself, and as a way of engaging with the world. So that, I think, is an important distinction for me. And I think it's important because it reframes play as something that can exist anywhere, for anyone, anytime. It doesn't need to exist in this specific space or in a certain type of activity. So then we can focus instead on embodying more of a playful attitude to our interaction, rather than focusing on how it can be used as a means to an end, for example. But play is often framed, as we said, for something for children. So I think this expanded definition might help people to understand how it can be in our lives as adults as well, that we don't have to just go out and find time to play, but play can be, in all these different spaces.
Yeah, and then that's why we were really impressed at that. Like right at the beginning, you drew that distinction, and it sets the tone. If people don't fully understand that, then if you're new to the concept of play and playfulness, like you said, it's games and kids, and important to really call out that playing with concepts is what adults do all the time. So it's oftentimes just pinning it down to actually speak it and say it, and people go, "Oh, I do play with concepts."
Exactly. Yeah.
I would play with objects, and those objects would make me think, and then I'm playing with thoughts as I move. So we're internalizing oftentimes what we externalize as kids. Even internal chatter. When you see our little boy, particularly 2-year-old, just kind of chattering, but we just internalize that chatter when we get older. So we do a lot of we still continue doing a lot of the things we did as kids. We just kind of, I'm using the head too much. I'm getting very cognitive. We're embodied. It's we have our whole body in play.
Yeah, definitely.
So Savannah, I am going to read the opening lines of your thesis, and then I am going to ask you some questions. Wicked sustainability problems are distressing and overwhelming. Where social, environmental, and political sustainability movements are growing, so is the concern around our individual and collective well-being as we navigate the complexity of these issues. Terms like eco-anxiety and climate burnout have been embedded in the lexicon of environmental action, highlighting the debilitating after effects of engaging with sustainability issues. Yet the imperative to stay engaged remains, and so we must find new sensitive ways of addressing these critical topics. For this engagement to be sustainable in its own right, it must therefore become sustainable from a social, emotional, and experiential perspective. So, Savannah, from your research, where do you think play and playfulness can contribute to environmental action?
Yeah, so I guess that's kind of where I focused a lot of the research and it ended up heading, but it was definitely through not only the research itself, but also the experience of kind of going through that process with different participants that highlighted two key places where play and playfulness can contribute in these big topics. And so one in how it can kind of actively help us to be more creative, how it helps to be more innovative, explore these new solutions, and very kind of production oriented. And then the second part is how it can contribute to us our kind of individual and collective well-being. So how it can support us, again, with these really complicated issues and emotions like eco-anxiety, how it can kind of help to combat that. And I think play has this wonderful capacity to create calm and put people at ease. It also finds space for distraction, escapism, imagination, and all of these things have a kind of healing ability that help us to engage with these really complex issues in a way that isn't completely focused on being fear-based or destructive or kind of fatalistic as well. And so it embeds this hopefulness and joy in it. And I think that's a really important element of working towards more socially just, ecologically just futures, in that we need to have an element of hopefulness there. And that helps us to combat things like eco-anxiety, not in their totality, of course, but I think it can definitely help to rebalance some of those feelings and in turn enable us to engage in much more personally sustainable long-term ways, so that we don't get completely burned out by the overwhelm that are these huge, complex, wicked problems. And the second side, of course, is that it can help us to be more creative and innovative. And this is something that's already been explored a lot in play research, especially through practices like serious play and gamification. They employ game or play elements to work towards this outcome or goal, or just facilitate the creative process itself. And so I think that is an important element of play. But for me, the conclusion I came to was that we should focus more on the way that play can contribute to well-being, both individually and collectively. And that should kind of be the primary value of that. If we're just using play to be a means to production, sometimes it can undervalue the core reason for playing itself, which is, to have fun. And so actually, yeah, for me, it was kind of that production can maybe be a byproduct of play for eco-social change. And then the primary goal itself is more just about building resilience, building well-being, and kind of building that more healing relationship with those topics.
Yeah, great answer. And
Yeah,
I think
fantastic.
it speaks to conversations we have with clients as well. It's probably the consideration is it's a paradox, essentially, serious and play. I mean, they're not totally distinct from one another. You can oftentimes, when we're talking to clients, they probably have realized that they're over-indexed on taking everything in the workplace serious, and that may have been imbued in the culture. And then in terms of risk taking, people, just talking about mistakes. So introducing a little bit of more playfulness and creativity and imagination to imagine a possibility of things changing is where this you're trying to kind of balance this paradox as much as you can. And I really liked you mentioned a variety of things like gamification and serious play. Again, you made another distinction which we thought was really impressive and important: situated play design and how it differs from gamification. So can you explain that?
Yeah, definitely. So situated play design is a methodology, design research methodology, which was co-developed by my thesis advisor, Farhan Altari-Babetran. And it's a collaborative research approach that looks to design both with and for playfulness in our everyday lives. So the methodology focuses on finding existing instances of play within the research space that we're interested in. These become known as play potentials, and then it looks to leverage and enhance these kind of instances of playfulness so that we can find it more actively and embed it more into our everyday. In terms of distinguishing it from gamification, I think there may be two key differences. I'm sure Farhan would explain that there are more, but yeah, I can talk through two. So one is that, again, with the distinction between games and play, gamification focuses on using game elements applied to certain contexts, and particularly often problem spaces. So using game as a format to explore certain problems and reach conclusions. Whereas SPD, situated play design, it has a much broader and more open understanding of play and wants to find these more nuanced examples of play situated within our everyday lives. And so it has this kind of open-ended, free-form recognition of play that isn't just limited to a game context. And then maybe another distinction is that gamification approaches add gamefulness into an otherwise non-game environment, often. Not always, but often. Whereas SBD focuses on supporting and enhancing pre-existing playfulness. So it looks for play that is already there and tries to find a way to enhance it rather than injecting it into a space that maybe isn't already playful.
I think, again, that's an important distinction when we wanted you to clarify that, because sometimes we will hear that our clients, when they're kind of verbalizing it, how can we work with them? They naturally think we're going to bring gamification into, I would say, primarily learning and development. So all of a sudden there's metrics and success metrics and it feels, and again, to your point, how people interpret gamification and how they use it is so broad. So if I from what we would understand of gamification, and the distinction between situated play design, sometimes gamification is just, I'm going to describe it as shoehorned. It's just pushed in there without, like you said, looking for play potential, existing areas where it would feel natural to go in. Again, but gamification can be used effectively, but that
definitely,
bring gamification into our work. So that's why I was really, I thought it was nice for you to explain situated play design.
I have another question about the Eco Playbook. So within your thesis, you created a number of artifacts that help people engage in serious topics in a more playful manner. So can you now talk us through some of these artifacts so people would understand how to, use them?
Yeah, definitely. So across the research process, I co-created, often with my research participants, 3 different artifacts. The first was the very preliminary research stage where I was looking to understand what these play potentials were. And so I designed this play pack of creative probes, so kind of activities which focused on different or mundane examples of environmental action, and then tried to get the participants see traces of playfulness within that. And those were 5 different activities across a range of different environmental actions that were kind of completed asynchronously and then fed into the secondary research process. And then the second artifact that came from those was my card deck of play potentials. So this took the findings from the play packs and translated these traces of playfulness into individual cards. So each one card showed a kind of trace of playfulness within environmental action that already existed, and rephrased it into a prompt for then expanding on that and understanding how we can put that, kind of embed that into our everyday lives in a much more kind of deeper and thorough way. And this is a tool which I used in the latter research stages in the workshop. So these kind of built on those playful traces and then found ways to surface them in our everyday lives. And it's a workshop tool which basically just allowed for kind of open and silly conversations about what play might look like within environmental action. And these are now open source materials along with a workshop pack as well. And then the third artifact I can go through quickly is the playbook itself. So this catalogs the ideas and interventions and concepts and conversations that we had through those workshops, and basically puts all of these outrageous ideas for playfulness in environmental action just into one space. And this includes things like interventions, policies, exhibits, changes of behavior, events, lots of different things that would allow us to be more playful and environmentally active, like simultaneously. And this exists in a digital format as a kind of downloadable PDF, and then also it's a living format on Instagram that I'm trying to continue to build to. But it's basically just a catalog of these interesting ideas that maybe, hope to kind of build some conversation around that.
And just to follow up on that, which artifact do you feel had the most impact and engagement?
Yeah, so I think because the number of research participants I engaged with on the whole, in the grand scheme of things, was quite small. I think the play potential cards themselves maybe generated the most interesting conversation within that group itself. But the catalogue now exists as something which is maybe the most easily accessible to people that weren't within that research process, and just presents these ideas that lots of people can engage with and see different versions of themselves, and maybe kind of act as inspirational material for exploring play and environmentalism in different ways.
I like the way when you were answering, you described those artifacts as interesting, but prior to that, you said outrageous.
Yes. Yeah.
I think that's the point of trying to immerse people in a more playful environment, more playful way of being, a more playful way of relating. Trying to move them ultimately into an abstraction. You're trying to help people abstract out of the day-to-day. So outrageous,
Exactly.
probably people aren't thinking outrageously enough, and that's
Mm-hmm.
why we really liked those artifacts. And we're going to link all of this into the show notes, and we found it, that was it's very accessible as well. Like, this is PhD standard, I'm going to say. It's really impressive. And if you could wave a magic wand, who should use your playbook? And how do you think it will help them in an ideal world? Like, this playbook is now being used by who, and how do you think it'll help?
Yeah, so the playbook itself, I think, is really for anyone. But it came from a place of my own personal eco-anxiety. And so I hope at least it can at least relate, find a kind of connection to people that are also dealing with similar things there, and might just be a window for finding a little kind of glimpse of hopefulness and playfulness within that otherwise really distressing space, and the narratives in the media and not kind of creating that playful antidote. And so I think maybe this could be that in a way. And because it's open to everybody and I want to continue building on it, I also want it to be like this kind of collaborative resource that grows and changes over time, even out of my control. I don't mind. It would be nice to see how other people relate to that and find playfulness in their engagement with environmental issues. And then I think the workshop pack and the playful potential cards themselves, I think they're definitely can be used within a design or creative practice context. So to stimulate interesting ideation around environmental action. Mostly, I just kind of hope that they can be used as a different lens to environmental action to, again, just like rebalance this overwhelming narrative and become one that centers and cares for our well-being within these difficult topics, and kind of gives people a space to explore that.
Well, like I could say, like the team at Hamite, we're certainly going to use integrate your pack into our work, and we're looking forward to collaborating with you and trying to bring it to more areas, because it's important work, and we just love the way you've framed it in a playful manner. So I would say just well done.
Fantastic.
We have a mural which we send people our questions, and some people, it's okay. How did you find actually getting through the mural with the questions?
Yeah, it was great. I'm a visual thinker, so it was really perfect for me.
We were hoping. And there is a section where we'll either post people Lego, or we'll get you to complete a Madlib. And you completed the Madlib. So we haven't seen it. So we're going to go in, and I'm going to share my screen. It's the first time we're doing this, share screen. So I might go, well, let's see. So just again, this is the first time you've opted for this. Just to show people at home, we've given a lot of little Lego characters and a variety of different Madlibs, and we have some examples here ourselves. And you chose 2 Madlibs and 2 characters. So will you can read it out and talk us through your choice as well. So you take it away.
Yeah, maybe I can read it out first and then explain the characters that I picked afterwards. So I hope my readers take away from my research that play as adults doesn't have to just be a means to an end or a way of innovating something new, because there is so much value in just the act of play and the attitude of playfulness for our relationships, for our resilience, for well-being, and of course for fun. And I chose the little robot because I don't know, she looked like innovation to me, and this kind of focus on creating new stuff and new processes, new technologies, and a lot of the time maybe that's what playfulness within the work context is framed around. And I think it's so much more than that. It's more about these 2 people over here who are kind of, I don't know what they're doing, but they're they're having fun together. They seem to have a good relationship, creating something. Yeah, there's just so much more kind of holistic value in play that doesn't just have to be really kind of solution driven.
Yeah, and again, yeah, that's lovely to hear. I mean, it has a secondary benefit, which we think is not acknowledged enough in that you're building social bonds, and that is a core element. Because our view of play is always through an ancestral lens, as in like, why do we still continue to do this thing? Like it points towards an ancestral wisdom, we would describe, of play, in that you're playfully interacting with your environment, which is kind of like your robot, innovation. But as a secondary, you're playfully engaging with others, and in doing so, you're consolidating and building social bonds. So it's lovely for you to call that out, because it is important.
Yeah, definitely.
Second Mad Lib, you take it away.
Yes. So I changed, I can't remember what this originally was, but I changed the second word to hope. But I hope my work helps people to reconnect with what play and joy means to me, maybe on a more childlike level, but also in our changing and evolving definitions of play and what we enjoy engaging with. And then I just picked Yoda because he's a force, and theme of force felt accurate and relevant. So yeah, finding a force of hopefulness, I think, is really important, and that can really help to lead back to then that creative ideation and the spaces for innovation and more kind of practical led work. But that hopefulness itself is really, really important in the space of eco-social change and sustainability.
Fantastic.
Thank you very much. I'm
Yeah.
going to go stop share. Boom, we're back.
They were great.
Yeah, you're the first.
Yeah, definitely.
The first. Hopefully we get a couple more. And I think that's it.
I think we've asked you enough questions.
Yeah. How was that?
It was okay? Great. Yeah, it was really good. Thank you so much for having me.
You're a pro, Savannah. You're a pro. Honestly, our viewers will, get so much out of this. And also, I think it shows, how much can be learned as well on that tough journey, doing a thesis. We're doing a PhD, and you have basically gotten so much from that, which is fantastic as well. And you're basically lighting the torch. You're continuing with your work, which is wonderful.
I would say your thesis made me reflect on my thesis, and my thesis was just words. I'm going to say no images and zero play. It was very much a serious endeavor. Yeah, it was very much a manuscript, and I felt kind of, I don't know, cheated. Savannah. I thought I could have had a more playful interaction during that time, and so that's why we were so impressed.
Yeah.
And look, thank you so much for being a guest on the show. We really appreciate you taking your time. Savannah, will you tell us one thing? I said this before we go. What's the name of your doggy, and why are they in pajamas?
Her name is Uma. She's in pajamas because she had a haircut last week, and basically it's a bit itchy, and so she's been itching herself to the point where she's made herself poorly. So now she's in pajamas to stop her itching herself. But she's fine. She'll be okay in a couple of days. She's very
full recovery.
Yes, she's very dramatic. So yeah, she'll be all right.
Okay, Savannah, thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Great day. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.